Keto diet and insulin resistance. What are some of the basics that you need to understand to cut through the hype and make healthy choices? Coming right up. So keto is incredibly popular right now, and the reason is that it reverses insulin resistance, and so many people are insulin resistant. That's why it's popular, that's why it works. So let's look at those in a little bit more depth so that we can understand a lot more about the big picture. So it's all about blood sugar to start with. So the brain needs blood sugar, absolutely. Whether you're in ketosis or eat high carb, your brain needs blood sugar. But if you're in ketosis, you taught your brain to also burn ketones, so you're not as dependent on carbohydrates, the volume of carbohydrates, but it still needs to be maintained within a certain range. So that range is about 80 to 120. And if you eat whole foods, primarily low carb, the way our ancestors did for tens of thousands of years, your blood sugar is going to stay right in that narrow range of about 80 to 120. Today, for example, I had my coffee with some butter and a little coconut cream. Then a few hours later, I had a big omelette. And there was a lot of stuff in that omelette. I put some bacon, I put lots of cheese, I put avocado, I put some vegetables, some spinach. So it was probably 12 to 1,500 calories. But even if after eating all of that, I checked my blood sugar and it was 112 30 minutes later. So you can eat the right kinds of food and still maintain your blood sugar, and that's what the keto diet does. When we eat high carb, however, then it is more like this blue line here, that the carbohydrates will drive up the blood sugar, and when the blood sugar is a lot higher than 120, it's an emergency. So the body releases a ton of insulin to help that sugar out of the bloodstream and into the cell. And we're going to look at that in more detail. And if everything is working in the early stages of this, your body can still bring it down to a normal level. It still keeps it within here. The red line illustrates what happens a lot after a while when your blood sugar gets more and more dysregulated by different factors such as stress and malnutrition and carbs. Now you can have high blood sugar and low blood sugar called hypoglycemia alternating. So you can have insulin resistance and hypoglycemia at the same time. And then once you just totally wear out that machinery, then you have diabetes, which means you're starting off high, it rises and it tries to come down, but it never gets down to where it needs to be. So that's different scenarios. So let's look at what's happening in a little bit more detail. So here's the red tube here, that's the bloodstream, and it has glucose because the food you eat results in blood sugar. Eventually the way that's absorbed into the bloodstream is in the form of glucose, and that's the only form that circulates in the bloodstream. And in order for the glucose to get into the cell, these blood vessels, they become capillaries and they come really, really close to the cell so that with some help, that sugar can get into the cell. And the cell has insulin receptors. Those are the little blue Y's here. And the red triangle, that's insulin. And they don't look like this, that's just an illustration. And when that red insulin fits into the receptor, now that receptor changes the configuration. It's like a key in a lock that opens up a door, and now the glucose can get through. And that's the ultimate goal. So in a healthy person that can maintain blood sugar, that doesn't have the spikes of blood sugar or insulin, there's going to be a balance between blood glucose and insulin receptors. The body is going to decide, it's going to adapt over time and create just the right amount of all of those. But when we start eating a lot of carbohydrates, when we start creating high blood sugar, especially on a regular basis, now we change the equation. We change the components, and there is a lot more blood sugar around. So the body has to make a whole lot more insulin, and that's the pancreas that makes that insulin. So over time, that pancreas can get exhausted. It gets overworked. What also happens now, though, is the cell, the purpose of the glucose is that the cell has certain metabolic needs. And when those needs are met, the cell doesn't need any more glucose. But the glucose keeps coming. So the cell says, hey, back off, wait up a little bit. Enough is enough. And when it still keeps getting more and more glucose, it says, well, now I'm going to start getting rid of some of these receptors. I'm going to down-regulate the receptors because this is just getting out of hand. I don't need that much glucose, and since the receptors are what's bringing it in, I'm just going to reduce the number. I'm going to down-regulate. And now we have insulin resistance. So think about it this way, just like a metaphor. If you're living in a cabin in the wilderness and your only source of fresh water is rainwater and you're collecting it in buckets. So you have 50 buckets and you go around, you put the buckets out and wait for the rain, and then the rain comes and you get an inch in every bucket and you collect it all and you have enough for a couple of weeks until the next rain. Now imagine that it rained all the time. It was just pouring down and it almost never let up. Then after a few months or a few years, would you still put out 50 buckets? Of course not. You would have learned that it's enough to put out 2 or 3 buckets because they're going to fill up anyway. And before you can use one, there's going to be another one. So you're not going to put out the buckets. That's what the body is doing. It's not going to keep all the receptors because there's an overflow. There's an abundance. But here's the problem. The blood sugar is still high. The cell doesn't want it, but the blood sugar is still high and it has to get out of the bloodstream because it's creating problem. It's creating every problem that you ever heard of in diabetes is from that high blood sugar and the inflammation associated with insulin. So the body keeps trying to make more insulin, but the problem's compounded by high sugar and fewer receptors. And now we're really pushing that pancreas to work, and eventually it gets exhausted. And when it can't keep up, then we have diabetes. So let's look at this, just one other version of this. So we eat the carbs, it results in high blood glucose. Because of the high blood glucose, it results in high insulin. For a while, the high insulin can bring the blood sugar back down to normal, and it looks like we're doing fine. And we could probably keep this up for years, maybe even decades. This is why this didn't used to happen until we got into our 50s and 60s. Now that we are abusing our bodies more than ever, it starts coming down in age to 30 and 20 and even teens. And what we want to understand is it's all about blood sugar and insulin, and carbs result in high blood sugar. They have a very strong insulin response. And this holds true for all starchy carbs. It is not true for non-starchy vegetables. So when people say, oh, you can't eat any carbs on keto, that's incorrect. You can eat non-starchy vegetables, leafy greens, green beans. There's lots and lots of things you can eat, plenty of, to get you lots and lots of different nutrition that doesn't trigger insulin. Protein has a mild to moderate insulin response, and fat has a negligible insulin response. So that's the whole idea about this. And non-starchy vegetables also have a negligible insulin response. So I'll make another video to talk more about what types of foods to eat, like the food pyramid for keto, but for here we're just going to leave it at that. So the body can keep up oftentimes for a long time, but eventually when we push the system too far for too long and we wear out that pancreas, now we have the high carb and we get the high blood glucose, but now the high insulin is insufficient and the pancreas can't make any more. It's reached its peak and it's starting to decline because it's worn out. So we still have the high blood glucose, and now they tell us in the diabetes management to eat moderate carbs. But it's not enough because we destroyed the machinery. So moderate carbs is not going to fix this. You want to think of this whole system as your carbohydrate tolerance machinery. Okay, it's like a machine. It processes carbs. As they come in, it takes care of them. But if you break the machine, then you can't just cut back to half. Okay, you have to do something more drastic. You have to cut way, 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 way back to allow the body to recover, for that pancreas to back off so much on the carbs that the pancreas has a chance to keep up, to catch up, and to cut way, way back so that the cells actually become a little bit hungry for that blood sugar, because then they're going to start to increase those insulin receptors again. They're going to up-regulate those insulin receptors. So that's a key to understand in the body, that you can change some things rather quickly by a change in lifestyle, but some other things you have to be patient because your body needs time to heal. Someone said you can never step in the same river twice because the water is always changing. Well, it's the same in the body. Your body is not the same that it was last year. 90% of the cells have changed. So if you give the body a year and allow it to make some new cells, then the new cells will have a chance to upregulate. You have a chance to heal the machinery. So most people start keto because they want to lose weight. And great, whatever it takes. But it's not about the weight, it's about the insulin resistance, because insulin resistance is responsible for 95% of all degenerative disease. Or if not fully responsible, at least associated with 95% of all degenerative disease. So what that means is, once you do the keto and reverse insulin resistance, you are getting healthier, and that's the whole goal. And when you get healthier, the weight will come off as a result. It's not about the weight, it's about health, and insulin resistance is the greatest threat to health that we know of. Now, when people talk about a balanced diet, what does that mean? Okay, for some people, the recommendations today is to eat 60% of carbs from carbohydrate. That's about 300 grams a day for a small person and 400 grams a day for a large person like myself. And for some people, then they say, oh, eat a balanced diet. They probably mean maybe cutting that by half. I don't know what they mean, but I've seen some examples like that. But 150 or 200 grams is still way high. And if you want to reverse this, if you want to fix, if you want to have a chance of healing your broken machine, then you can't keep high or moderate. You have to go low or even very, very low. So a healthy person without insulin resistance can probably lead a healthy life somewhere around 70 grams of carbs. But that's still not going to cut it for someone who has broken their machine. They might need to get down to 40 or 30 or 20. And no two people are the same, so it's not like a set rule. It's a principle. The keto diet is not a diet. It's a principle of how to reduce the carbohydrates enough to reverse the damage to this machinery. And it doesn't mean that you eat all fat. It means you start off with vegetables, you eat moderate protein, and then you fill up with quality fats, just enough to feel full. So again, I'll do a different video on the keto food pyramid so we can clarify some of those things. So I wanted to dive in a little bit more in detail because there's so much confusion, and I hope this has been helpful in understanding some of the basic mechanisms of physiology and some of the dynamics that influence all of this. So please share this video, make your comments. I'll answer questions and make videos if you have more interests. And as always, thanks for watching.